What I really want to do is I want all of you to think of one idea that we can take away, that we must chase, that we must implement. That will be the first round. You can also think about how we can do it. And I'll give you each 3 to 4 minutes as your opening intervention for that one big idea that we should change coming out of this conference, or maybe your other experiences. In the second round, I'm going to ask you about one thing we must stop doing. One thing that must be discarded, a habit that must be dropped, an institution that no longer should exist. Have your pick. Do whatever bad idea that must be discarded by us. And finally, in the final round, instead of going to the audience, I'm going to each one of you to comment on what your fellow panelists have said. So I want you to be the interrogators of what the others have said, and that will be the final round of this. So, Velina, let me start with you. One big idea that we should chase coming out of this conference.
Okay, so here is my idea. I have been carefully listening to all the discussions, and we've been talking a lot about gender, race, and ethnic equality. So my idea is that we also need a mindset shift when it comes to nations equality. And the idea here is that it is equally important to propagate nations equality next to all the other issues of equality that we are facing right now. And how to achieve that in the short term? India. Namely that we have a very big role in terms of G20, where India needs to be this advocate for nations equality, speaking from its own experience, of course. We all know that every nation has, of course, its national interests, but speaking also for the 6 billion who are underrepresented in all relevant international, regional organizations, formats. India is this special case in a sense that it is a bridge between the Western-led institutions on the one hand and the China-led institutions on the other hand. It can practically advocate in both worlds, not only for itself, but for all other nations that are not there, that are not at the table, and that will be affected by the decisions that are taken either by the West or by the Dragon Bear and their alliances and partnerships. And how to achieve this is practically to start thinking now of a concrete deliverable, and that means that first and foremost, the signal will be to really have a joint declaration or any kind of, final document at the G20 summit to not get caught by this growing competition. And second message is nations equality can be only achieved if we do not allow the emergence of another Cold War scenario. Because as we've heard from all the panels, nobody in the global south, absolutely nobody is going to be on the winning side in any kind of way. In terms of local communities, in terms of businesses in the industries, yes, we may argue in short term there will be some gains, but in the long term, competition of that kind, that means competition between two systemic rivals that want, to antagonize the world once again, is not going to be a good outcome for the 6 billion. So nations equality, and then a clear advocate who starts speaking for the interests of all those nations and starts representing them also in all this.
So thank you for your intervention, but I'm just leaving, I'm just quick response, leaving it out there. The UN Charter was meant to do that. All nations were equal, and that was supposed to be the platform and forum for nations being equal. And maybe deep down, there is an element of the need to have a completely revamped, reformed, and renewed, revived international platform, such as the United Nations. Maybe somewhere there, that is what you're referring to.
This is the perfect example, because the Security Council of the United Nations is currently probably one of the most bifurcated international bodies. It is completely dysfunctional. And I have done a study and also provided some recommendations for the T20 team that they need to start preparing for this scenario already, where we have the West team and we have the Dragon Bear team within the UN Security Council.
Okay.
So who is speaking, actually, when these resolutions are being actually decided? Who is speaking for for the global south? Who is actually taking care of the interests of 6 billion people?
Hiro, let me turn to you.
Agenda of this session is so difficult, concrete, and actionable proposal. So, secretly to President Saran, I asked it to a ChatGPT. I put all agenda, ask ChatGPT. Then 2 answers. One answer was very, very specific measures to tackle global warming. So I said no to ChatGPT. Give me more broader answer to solve insecurity and uncertainty of the global system. And in second, it gave me one answer. That is to introduce universal basic income to every part of the world. And it also gave me the roadmap, 6 roadmap. But it is like increasing public awareness and securing necessary fund and also mobilize public support. So I think it's nothing wrong, but it's very boring. And I'm sure that he will give me B- or C grade if I repeat this. So my idea is this. My idea is that connecting all existing mini-lateral organizations in the world and make a network so that they can collaborate each other together, regionally or worldwide, to tackle with the existing issue. Because as I examined, there are at least 120 mini-lateral organizations. And some of them are working, and some of them are not working, and they are overlap geographically and functionally. So here is my roadmap to facilitate this. First of all,
And did you ask ChatGPT this, or is this yours?
this is mine.
Okay.
Yeah, this is mine. Please don't worry. Maybe if you ask, maybe they will give me answer, but I didn't ask this one. Anyway, so 2 questions. How to facilitate? And we cannot expect UN to facilitate under this reality. So I think that the G20 could be a good facilitator. Mm-hmm. And then there are 3 steps. First step, G20 will launch intensive review of the all existing mini-lateral organization, and then select key organizations that are very proactive. And then second step, G20 will ask all representatives of key mini-lateral organizations to gather, and then G20 will ask them to come up with a prescription about exactly the same agenda of this session. Mm-hmm. And then next year, G20 will gather all representatives of those mini-lateral organizations again, and then share the prescription they come up, and then try to find the common solution. And if maybe we can find the possible, kind of scenario under which some of the organizations can collaborate each other, or maybe we can push for horizontal, global-wide cooperation. So my idea is, if top-down solution does not work, maybe we should at least promote.
No, I think that's a very, very wise input, and I think de facto it is already happening in an informal manner.
Right.
Because, for example, since you mentioned, Belina mentioned India, India is part of SCO, part of BRICS, part of Quad, part of the G20, and there are many other such countries who are part of many such groupings. America perhaps maybe a member of half of them, and the Chinese of the rest of them. So that's a good idea. I'm not sure G20, because G20 is a 1-year presidency, and unless you want the G20 presidency to have a 2-year term, we might have efficiency gap there. Yeah. But I think the idea of a plurilateral world and how do we make that work when multilateralism is not working is certainly something we should pursue with much greater vigor.
I'm glad to know that you didn't give me B- or C.
No. No, I asked ChatGPT what to give him. ChatGPT said A. President, let me turn to you. President Quiroga.
Thank you, Samir. The one idea I would do is G12, or I don't like the G words anymore because we have so many, but basically a mechanism where we coordinate among developing countries in a more permanent basis. Let's call it, for the lack of a better term, instead of G12, which is the G20 minus the 7 minus the European Union. Well, maybe 13, because we should add Spain. If we have a Spanish speaker, we'll keep him in. But it's really this, what we have at this event here. I would say the ORF and Rwanda, the Rwanda principle, whereby we convene people, and we're not like airlines. We don't have to get from South America to Africa, I have to go through US or Europe. No, let's convene and talk to each other about the shared challenges. You know, Club de Madrid is not really a Spain organization. It's heads of state from different parts of the world. The office happens to be in Madrid. So we can put the office in Kigali or wherever, or the rotating presidency. But the principle is have a mechanism whereby we coordinate among Latin America, Africa, Asia, without waiting to be convened. I salute you for doing this event. I have been to thousands of events, and my list is not exhaustive, when I talk to people from India or from Africa or from other parts of Latin America, but normally it's the World Bank or the UN or the US or the Europeans or the NDI or somebody convening us, as opposed to self-convening and then put our issues on the table. What we want to do about trade. The reality is the US is not open for business. Why don't we talk between Africa and Latin America? Why don't we talk to India and Brazil on what we do on trade? Exchange rates are all moving because the only institution that works in the US, which is the Federal Reserve, the only one that works very effectively, I will say. They have a blower, they print dollars, come the dollars. We all appreciate. Now it's a vacuum cleaner, right? They're going to raise interest rates. Did they today? I don't know. Maybe they raise them again. They suck out all the dollars. We have liquidity crunch. Exchange rates go up. We need money from the IMF, the World Bank. There's no dollars. Where do we talk about digital? We talked a lot about digital, tech, migration. Where do we talk about those things? And what you've done here is unique. So let's do this. We have the Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, all the developing countries. I guarantee you what I said at a forum, at a panel is very true. This does not happen amongst our governments. Yes, there are some efforts to do it, but create the Rwanda mechanism, the G12 mechanism, bring governments to the table, and ask them one thing. When Latin American countries come, they should not just represent their own interest. Argentina hosted the G20 and they got out of it $50 billion from the IMF. Congratulations. But they did not represent what we wanted from Latin America. Or I don't know if South Africa represents your position. Make sure they come representing. So we need regional mechanisms that feed a global mechanism, and this Rwanda type principle where we meet. And I would appoint Samir and Usta, the godparents of this Rwanda child that allows us to coordinate policies among developing countries.
Usta? That's falling on you. But maybe I'll come back to you. You'll have a chance to respond to that. Prime Minister, can I turn to you now?
Thank you. We discussed during the 2 days and a half about different challenges. And all of that challenges needs a strong political willingness and linked to leadership. The problem is then for me, how to force leadership to act everywhere around the world. And the most efficient thing to force leaders to act is the civil society, and specifically on the democratical countries. And that's why, in my opinion, we have to try to settle a real strong global civil society. Not only during the events like COP, like the event like that, G20 meeting, but a civil society, global civil society, which can work regularly, study, propose, organize a meeting, organize an event, to challenge the global leadership and to act in order to force some action to be done. That's why, for me, this idea can be taken into account. And how to do that is to try to create a strong networks from national civil societies, regional civil societies, maybe continental civil societies, and global civil society, a real network, in order to get these targets. And the next problem will be how to finance that, because civil society must be independent, not linked to government, not linked to international organization. I think philanthropists could find in that way some interesting idea to put money in order to better the international relationship. That's why this idea, I think, can be taken into account.
No, what is really remarkable in the first 4 interventions, Usta, before I turn to you, is that literally there is a consensus that the current international system is not working. Velina talks about the paralysis of the UN Security Council and its inability to represent the global South and its interest. Hiro was very clever in saying pretty much the same thing, that plurilateralism in a multipolar world requires an arrangement amongst these influential clubs. President Quiroga mentioned that we need a new coordination mechanism and an amplifier for the global South, the emerging economies. He called it Rwanda, right? That could be the hashtag from next time. Thank you, sir. And of course, the Prime Minister very eloquently said that the civil society today needs to be able to challenge, shape, impact decisions that are going to affect them, right? And he's talking about the rise of a global civic community that is willing to take the mantle of shaping our future. What's your idea, Usta?
Well, thank you very much. My idea is inclusiveness. You know, I think what has gone wrong historically is my interests I can only achieve when you don't have. We sit in a country where people thought that if you kill the other, your life is better. You didn't need all the other many things. The political conviction informed ordinary citizens that genocide is a solution. And it wasn't a solution. It has not been a solution at all. Not one person benefited from it. And the same country, 29 years ago, 100% divided. Pains of being refugees, pains of being orphans. The people that have reconstructed this country had only one collective effort. We want to live and live a dignified life, and the only way we can achieve that is to find our togetherness. We don't look alike. We are not the same height. We don't have the same voices. We are youth, we are children, we are men, we are women. We are civil society, we are religious organizations. We are government. We are the private sector, we are cooperatives. But we have one place called Rwanda. It's home for us. We want to exist and exist with dignity. We want to develop. We want to have local and international value. And I think, for me, what I want to bring in is, we will never really, ever succeed if we think that our interests are in competition. COVID has taught us that our interests were not in competition. It doesn't matter how many airlines you had. Rwanda had a small airline. We were all not in the airspace. So the existential challenges that we are facing today are pushing us to a space to realize what is common. And you know what is common? All our blood is red. We have only 4 blood groups. I'm a lawyer, I don't do biology. There is more common innate in us. But a lot of these structures that you're referring to somehow I think we want to ask the question, what built our fears? Why did we fear the other so much that we thought that our existence depends on the other not existing? Why are we over-investing in the fear of the other than investing in the finding of the identity and the commonality that we have in one another? So I will still say the spirit of the dialogue, the spirit of finding something that is common, both in terms of threats and in terms of emergency, should be the spirit of the Kigali dialogue, but the spirit that we take forward as countries and nations.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you about something that we need to stop doing, a habit we need to drop, an institution we need to say goodbye to, a practice that needs to be discontinued. And I'm going to go through the panel again. Let me this time surprise ChatGPT and start with you, Hero.
Then for this one, I didn't have time to ask ChatGPT. So purely my instinct. So maybe let's stop expecting too much to UN Security Council. So it doesn't mean that we will abandon any hope that UN Security Council or UN as a whole will become more relevant. But as we all know, under the current UN Charter, it is almost effectively impossible to reform the membership of the UN Security Council because all P5 have to agree. Mm-hmm. So my point is that in this conference, I also heard a lot of grievances that I share about the UN Security Council. But let's stop criticizing, expecting too much. But instead, let's pursue alternative path. That is to create second de facto UN, outside UN. Yeah, so that is concretely speaking, establishing the network of like-minded countries, and also, as I said, and the network of minilateral outside UN, and then let's make it to grow to be a second UN.
So what you are saying is it's time to stop having hopes from the UN and build another alternate solution.
Yeah, that is a big, important difference with nuance. It is important.
No, listen, I want a clickbait headline in my video.
Yeah.
I want people to watch it. I'll say, Japan specialist says no UN.
No. Yes, since I'm a journalist, I know how it is dangerous of the headline. So I'm not saying that abandon the hope, but abandon the hope is different from don't expect too much.
Okay.
But it is important to keep pressuring UN to become more relevant, but just keep criticizing, asking UN to change.
Fair enough.
That is my point, okay?
Okay. No, don't worry, we will have the right headline. President Quiroga, maybe a little bit turn to you.
I was tempted to say, let's blow up the P5 and the way the World Bank, the UN and the World Bank and the IMF works, but Hiro took care of that, so that's there. He's absolutely right, by the way. In what world could conceivably India not be part 50 years from now, 30 years from now, 5 years from now of a P5? Or in what world would you have global development institutions subject to the veto of one country or majorities? That is dysfunctional. But I think the Rwanda mechanism, let's go around it. It's like Messi kicking the free kick. Okay, the barrier's there. Let's just go around it and put it in the angle.
So despite the $50 billion loan that Argentina got, you still like Messi?
Oh, yes. Of course.
Okay.
He's a neighbor. And we sell Argentina gas, so we like to have Argentinians watching TV in the World Cup using up our Bolivian gas. So it's also a business proposition. The bad is obvious to me. Stop the criminal territorial annexation of Ukraine by Russia. And I like to call it that because of the following reasons. I think it is misguided to describe it as autocracy against democracy, or only see Europeans and Americans cheering for Ukraine, when the way it should be presented is the following. In the year 2022, is it possible? You were talking about colonial powers and an occupying country here. How could it be possible, and we have so many scars in Latin America and Africa about colonial powers, about territorial dismemberments, for a bully of a neighbor to invade you by force and seize your land and blow you up? That is, if you make that argument in Latin America, if you make that argument in Mexico, they'll understand it. They lost California and Texas to the US. My country was twice as big. We lost a lot of land to Brazil, to Argentina, to Paraguay, to Chile, the seacoast. So Africa, you can go through the list. So in today's world, it is inconceivable that somebody can invade somebody else and annex territory. If you make that argument, I think it's better, and it'll bring a lot of good things for everybody. And I'll give you one example. I know the alignment tends to be reflexively in many of our countries. Wait, the US is supporting them. The EU is supporting them. I want to be on the other side of that. No, just forget who the US and the EU are supporting. It was sad for me to see the Brazilian president say, no, Ukraine cannot pretend to keep everything. They got to give up something. I said, wow, if he's so generous, why doesn't he give us back 300,000 kilometers of the Acre, a zone in the north of Bolivia, the south of Brazil, that a Bolivian dictator got a white horse in exchange for that chunk of land. I said, I'll give you back the horse, give me the land, if you're feeling so generous. So let's stop the criminal invasion.
You know, in other countries, they gave us the Bible and took our land. No, I think so simply put, any politics that supports the diminishing of the sovereignty and supports territorial invasions in the 21st century is abhorrent and has to be rejected and abandoned. I think that's the key point you're making. In this case, it is Ukraine, but I'm sure this is a principle that must be followed for irrespective of who seeks this kind of politics.
Samir, you did better than ChatGPT.
Okay. You know, ChatGPT may have an Indian bias. We are like 17% of humanity. You know, very soon if ChatGPT starts speaking, they may have my accent also. You know? It may also dance like me, but it's okay. Let me turn to the Prime Minister.
I would like to focus the attention on Africa on this time, and link to not expectation from outside to help us and to give us money and to finance our infrastructure and other things. And in order to get that, we need more internal economy, strengthening financially, and we need more internal resources, tax resources, fiscal resources. And that's why I would like to say, please stop tax evasion from Africa. Tax evasion. The tax evasion causes more damage than other things, but it is totally hidden now. And I would like to link that to the tax haven. There is a lot of tax haven around the world, and it is amazing in 2023 to look at some countries, some areas, raising money based to tax evasion, based to the willingness of companies to reduce their tax duties elsewhere and to go there and to flourish. And these two things must be said and must be done. Stop tax evasion, stop tax haven around the world.
And I think that's an important point, because tax evasion requires tax havens, and there's a business model there that must be discontinued. So thank you for that important point. Usta, do you want to come in, and then I'll turn to Belina.
Well, I also want to come in from a perspective of challenging the narrative. You know, we should stop embracing a narrative. And I'm afraid that sometimes we even use the narrative that was constructed and led us to where we are as our defense. So I kept looking at the youth. You know, sometimes you can speak about giving youth the space until you are no longer youth. It doesn't take too long to stop being a youth. The same applies if so sometimes they hand over the complaining arm than the implementing arm. So I think we should stop using a narrative that is exclusive, using a narrative that sanctifies and doesn't sanctify. I'll use just one example. When you look at the list of the most corrupt countries in the different indices, they are going to be predominantly African countries. When you look at the least corrupt countries, they are going to be European countries. When you look at the bank accounts of the leaders of the most corrupt countries,
they're going to be in Europe.
They are going to be in Europe. I am a lawyer, initially a criminal lawyer trained, and keeping property that has been stolen is an accomplice to crime. But many of us in different status, civil society, government, and everyone else, we celebrate the narrative that says you are a thief, but doesn't tell the person who opens their gate and keeps the stolen things that they are a thief. I think it's that kind of narrative that we want to challenge. So for me, I enjoyed the inclusion part of it, but my biggest challenge sometimes is, we expand the exclusion by pushing ourselves in those circles. You know, I am a woman, I want to defend every right that women have, but I also want to remember that the children are not in this room. And thank you, Mr. President, for raising. When I sit here and I speak, and I will just give an example of Rwanda if you allow. When my members of parliament go to parliament, they are voted on political party lists, but they don't represent the ideas of those parties when they go to the parliament. They represent every Rwandan to hold government accountable for what they do. Because when they go there, the 80 members of parliament, if each of them just represented who voted them, we are divided in 80. But when they represent all our ideas and hold government accountable as a collective, then we are sure that they don't need to have had our votes or not. They represent all of us. So the element that when I sit here at the table, while I speak for Africa, I should remember that Latin America exists. Otherwise, we are unconscious of the other, so we should stop also being unconscious of the other.
I think that's a very important point. Thank you very much. Belina.
I make it very short so that we can actually go to round 3.
Correct.
In personal terms, as a human being, I would immediately raise Elon Musk's Neuralink program. Installing mind into a robot is in moral and ethical terms an absolute no-go. But that's just my personal view as a human being. As a geopolitical strategist, I have two...
No, one.
But there is only one sentence.
Okay. You know, Habermas wrote a book without a paragraph change or full stop. He wrote a whole book. But go ahead.
Good luck.
Sorry, I just revealed my age. I named an author that no one reads these days.
Militarization of space is coming with the deepening of the global system competition between United States and China. It's around the corner. We're going to be faced very soon with the new Star Wars programs, with a lot of new threats or whatsoever. We need to say no as a global community. Militarization of space means actually a physical threat to us as a human, human race. And next to it, clubs of a few. In my view, G7 is completely irrelevant. It doesn't reflect any geopolitical or geoeconomic realities in 2023. And in a sense, I would immediately raise it as a club of a few who decides over the fate of the majority.
But listen, you are against G7, not against my friend who was leading T7. You make it very clear.
I make it very clear. Like I said, we need inclusive and multilateral formats. But in a sense, G7 is a club of the past, is a reminiscence of the Cold War period. And in my view, it doesn't represent the interests of the majority, but the interests of a few. We should be mindful of the fact that we no longer need any geopolitical or geoeconomic clubs of the few. That is my point.
Okay, so now we are starting with the final session, where you'll all have 90 seconds to comment on something you've heard on in this discussion. For example, my comment is that she wants to take out G7 because it is a Cold War mentality, but she says NATO should exist, which is not Cold War mentality. So, for example, that could push back like that. I don't mean it. I'm just saying it. Okay, so it's just like food for thought, like that. Okay, so you can all have your individual opinion. I'm just saying that since I'm the moderator, I can't say these things. Okay, so let me start with Hiro. Hiro, you have an idea. I know that. So I'll start with you.
So journalist is very good at, not good at moderating discussion, but at provoking discussion. So actually, I agree equality of the states, among states, and also no aggression. So I agree everything what my colleagues said. But that makes me wonder, in order to achieve that, we need two kind of players. One is policeman, and one is prosecutor. Without policeman, the world cannot be, the world cannot maintain order, and we cannot achieve equality among the states. Or without prosecutor, we cannot achieve that. Just the discussing doesn't make sense. And whether we like or not, after the World War II, it was the United States, more or less, who conducted the leadership to maintain, at least in the Pacific region, play the role as a policeman. And they say they are not policemen anymore, but without the US military presence in the Pacific region, I don't think we can maintain the peace in South China Sea or East China Sea. So, and also prosecutor, UN Security Council has been played the role as a prosecutor, but it doesn't work anymore. So I don't have a solution myself.
So no policeman, no prosecutor.
Yeah, maybe we should discuss about it next year.
Okay. No, but a valid point. In a plurilateral world, who is the cop? I think that's the point. Who is undergirding stability and peace? I think that's the point you're right. And that's a fair point. So, President, can I turn to you?
One thing I've heard here, I'll be elastic in the definition. It's one thing I heard last night, and I heard it from Usta. And it's settled a discussion that I have with my daughter, Adriana. I try to persuade her that when you do public policy, good public policy, you can help and improve the lives of thousands of people at a time, or if you're in India, millions at a time. And she works for an NGO in the border in Texas, helping the kids from Nicaragua, Honduras, Salvador. So you can do good by helping one person at a time. So we had the discussion of which one is more effective. But here's Usta. She works at the Rwanda Governance Board. She's doing good for Rwanda and her country, thousands at a time. And after you see the memorial, it's heart-wrenching to see what happened here in the 90s. And to meet your daughter and say, yes, I have biological children, but the first child she has is somebody she adopted, an orphan from the genocide. So it goes to prove, and I told my daughter, you can do things for many at a time through public policy, or you can help one person at a time, an orphan from the genocide. So what I heard from Usta settled that discussion, and thank you for that lesson.
I think Usta, even I learned of this yesterday from you. So I think that is a lesson in itself. Our ambition should be to affect one life positively. And if all of us do that, the world will be a much better place. And thank you for doing that, Usta. Okay? Velina, let me turn to you. Your final thoughts on what you heard.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the following. The first is, of course, the needs of a global civic community, and there will be actually a new publication by the best-selling author Nassim Taleb, who is going to publish political principles for the people, how to actually establish certain indicators to hold decision makers responsible, because the biggest problem is actually that our politicians, no matter on which continent, they don't have skin in the game. They don't take responsibility when they make mistakes. When they leave mess, after them. This is a big problem. And I think that if, global civic community, that means that people everywhere have the access to deliverables and to certain principles, which I think apply for everyone. It will help a lot to actually create a mindset, what to expect from political decision makers, how to be more engaged in terms of your civilian responsibilities. We should not blame those who are leaving the mess behind. We should actually blame ourselves that we are not active enough to shape the policies and to contribute and to be active.
So we need a charter for global citizenship, we the people of the world.
Yes, and there are already commitments and there are already contributions. So I was just giving one example of many. I'm sure that other famous authors everywhere in the world are already thinking about it. So this is just one example. So this kind of work will be coming out, this kind of handbooks, this kind of,
By the way, even Mark Zuckerberg wrote one. He called it the community, right? Yes. Even he wrote one charter for the digital.
And these are universal principles. So everyone, no matter where you are, can actually subscribe to them. The second point is, of course, related to this amazing story coming out from Rwanda. I myself, being a teenager, being in a war-torn region during that time in the 90s, watching these scenes on the TV, I will never, ever forget. I was in my probably 13, 14 years, watching this scene from the stadium, what happened actually to Rwanda. So you need to understand that even in the 90s, this footage reached every corner of the world. Everyone knew about it. So in a sense, now what you said about the experience, the reconciliation process, you should probably go to Europe, because our Ukrainian and Russian neighbors will need a lot of reconciliation. There will be actually a day after the war. And this is a perfect example, in a
conference a little while earlier, actually in UAE, in the World Governance Summit, I actually said, perhaps it is time for us from the South and from other parts of the world to put together a delegation, a peace delegation, from a multi-country delegation to go to Europe and tell them that, peace is a good thing. Remember, they were coming to us and talking about it?
And share experience.
I think now we should go and remind them what they had conveyed to us. It's time to send a delegation there. Let me turn to you, Prime Minister.
Very shortly, I would like to come back to the fact of not too much expecting on UN Security Council or UN. I'm not okay with that. Because UN compared to G20, G7 or other figure, I don't know exactly. In UN, I am represented there. I prefer to count in think I am taking part, even though my voice is not very audible there, but I prefer to focus my attention on that. And I think we need and we should to put the highlight on UN in Africa, and African Union, on an institution like that, instead of creating a lot of new institutions. I don't believe really in the different G. Maybe with the presidency of India, Brazil, South Africa, we'll see some changes, and I hope so. But I prefer to keep attention on UN. This is my opinion.
Usta, the final word to you. It's open.
Well, thank you very much. My final word is, when I sat here through the days and in other conferences, we all want to be heard. Mm-hmm. We all have a contribution. We all have a story. And I think responding to my colleagues is, indeed, some of our challenges are very clearly on dysfunctionalities of the institutions that we have, on the absence of political will in some of our leaders. We definitely need political structures, because they are the spaces of our engagement, but we need to redefine those political structures. Civil society will take over and will be exactly the same as dysfunctional governments. The United Nations, all of these institutions, by the way, including colonialism, we need to just say, Rwanda is chairing the Commonwealth now. And I want to thank the Commonwealth for giving us the language that we all can speak in. We were able to communicate with all our accents, but we have a common language to speak in. So there are very positive things that we need to pick into all of these things. So the G20, the G7, the UN are simply institutions. If we had the right minds in those institutions, with the right intentions, with the right political will, but with an adjustment of those institutions to respond to current challenges. I think anything else that we create as well, if we don't keep the right minds, the right attitudes, the right intentions, and the right priorities, it might still as well give us the same results. Because our initial problem is not the absence of these institutions. Why don't we implement the things that we have agreed upon? It's not the absence of resources. We agreed earlier in this meeting. So I think we need to go back and interrogate what made us this selfish.
So I think that was a good parting piece of wisdom from you, Usta. But I was optimistic when I came into this panel. And I'm generally an optimistic person, other than when I'm on Instagram. But we all have different digital personalities. Don't smile at me. Everyone does, right? Ambassador Chinoy is a rock star if you go to his page. Otherwise, he's a diplomat. So let's be very clear. All of us have these dual roles and dual personalities. But, let me be honest here. We heard from a political expert, from a journalist of repute, from world leaders, from someone who's currently trying to solve governance challenges one person at a time. And we heard the same thing, that governance as we know it is not working. And it requires fundamental reset, reform, perhaps even a complete review, perhaps even a restart. We cannot agree 2 years after the worst pandemic we have experienced. We cannot agree on a pandemic treaty. The rich countries are showing no magnanimity in accommodating the concerns of those who needed response and help and care during those times. We are playing a zero-sum game on a pandemic treaty 2 years after the pandemic. We have good dinner tonight. On that happy note, please join me in applauding this panel for their wonderful interventions. And please join me for a family photo.